By 1969, the Beatles were no longer a band in harmony. Tensions ran deep. John Lennon was consumed by art and rebellion, Paul McCartney by control and perfection, and Ringo Starr by exhaustion. In the middle of it all stood George Harrison, quiet, patient, but growing restless. For years, his songs had been overlooked, pushed aside by Lennon and McCartney's dominance. But that year, something changed. George wrote a song that silenced everyone in the room. Even George Martin, the band's producer, who called it pure spiritual beauty. That song was something. For most of the Beatles' career, George Harrison lived in the shadows of Lennon and McCartney. He was the youngest, the least assertive, and often treated as the third songwriter. But beneath that calm exterior was a musician who had spent years studying, not just guitar, but life itself. By the late 1960s, George had immersed himself in Indian philosophy and spirituality. He had come to believe that love, in its truest form, wasn't romantic or possessive. It was divine. When he began writing something, he wasn't trying to write a love song. He was trying to capture that higher kind of affection, the kind that transcends everything. It's about pure love, he said, not just a woman, but the idea of connection itself. George Martin recognized that immediately. He later said, "There was something almost sacred about it. It had grace, pure spiritual beauty." The first time George played something at Abbey Road Studios, the band fell silent. Paul McCartney, always critical but fair, turned to him and said, "That's the best song you've ever written." Even John Lennon, rarely generous with praise, later admitted, "It's the best track on the album." George Martin, sitting behind the console, knew he was witnessing a breakthrough. Harrison had written something timeless, a melody so elegant it felt effortless. Martin described it as simple but perfect, one of those songs that feels as if it's always existed. It was the sound of George Harrison stepping into his own light. Recording something took time, but it never felt forced. George approached it with quiet authority, guiding the arrangement, shaping the tone, but never overcomplicating it. He played his famous Rosewood Fender Telecaster, giving the song its warm, liquid texture. Paul crafted a melodic bass line that danced around the vocals, and Ringo delivered one of his most delicate drum performances, subtle, restrained, perfectly human. Then came the solo. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed to impress. It spoke. Every note felt like a confession, gentle, honest, almost whispered. George later said, "It just came out. I didn't think about it. It was like the guitar was singing for me." When George Martin heard it in full, he was moved. He told Harrison quietly, "That's your voice, George. That's your soul." While many fans assumed something was written for George's then-wife, Pattie Boyd, Harrison always insisted it wasn't personal in that way. It was universal. It was about beauty itself, about the grace and devotion. The lyrics are deceptively simple. "Something in the way she moves attracts me like no other lover." But hidden beneath that tenderness is George's lifelong search for spiritual meaning. It's not desire, it's surrender. Not longing, but peace. George Martin said it best. You could feel that it came from a place beyond ego. It wasn't written to impress. It was written to express. When Something appeared on the Abbey Road album in 1969, it became the first Harrison song to be released as a Beatles A-side single, paired with Come Together. It was also the first time the world truly saw George Harrison as an equal to Lennon and McCartney. The song climbed to #1 in the US, covered by everyone from Elvis Presley to Frank Sinatra. Sinatra famously called it the greatest love song ever written. Even decades later, Paul McCartney still performs it in concert, calling it one of the most beautiful songs ever written, period. But for George Martin, Something was more than a hit. It was proof that George Harrison had reached the same artistic height as his bandmates, and maybe for a moment, even surpassed them. There was a grace in it, Martin said, that you rarely hear in popular music. It was spiritual, not sentimental. That's what made it timeless. When George Harrison passed away in 2001, Something became his musical epitaph. Paul McCartney performed it live, starting with a ukulele, George's favorite instrument, before the band joined in. It was a moment of reverence, not performance. You could feel what George Martin had recognized all those years earlier, that something wasn't just a song. It was a prayer. It represented everything George Harrison stood for: simplicity, humility, and the belief that love, in its truest form, connects us all. "All things must pass," Harrison once wrote, but something, somehow, never did. In the end, George Martin's words captured it best. It was pure spiritual beauty. That beauty came not from grand production or lyrical complexity, but from George Harrison's quiet honesty. While John and Paul fought for control, George reached for peace. And in doing so, he gave the Beatles one of their last perfect gifts, a song that reminded them, and the world, that even in the storm of fame, love could still sound simple and divine. Something in the way she moves. It wasn't just music. It was enlightenment set to melody.